This is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culchion Ford. Bird Culchion Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And good afternoon on this Tuesday, February the 21st, 2023. Craig Smoak, Grayson Grundhoefer, Garrett Ross behind the scenes. Welcome into the Bearcast on SicEm365.com, 365 Sports, and our Baylor YouTube channel, Baylor Bears on SicEm365. If you haven't hit subscribe, please do so and help support what we do and help keep us making sure that you have the best possible coverage of the Baylor Bears athletics program and also, various talk about other subjects as well. But we are here, as always, on Tuesdays at around noon to talk all things going on in Baylor athletics. Grayson, how are we doing this week, man?
Good. Another fun week. And, we always talk about this. During the spring, we start to have all of these sports that get ramped up. And it's kind of fun to cover those and just watch them and see how they progress throughout the year. So that's obviously been fun. Basketball has been the headline. Tough loss this weekend, but again, fun to watch. They're a good team. And so, overall good week to watch Baylor sports and a lot of good. And then also, as you had in your column, a lot of bad as well.
Yeah, there were some hits and some misses across the athletics landscape. We probably aren't going to get into all 20 sports every week that are going on, just simply because it's a lot to digest. But if you are looking to digest kind of a weekly summary, then I suggest taking a look at the good, the bad, the ugly column that I write. It comes out each Monday, and that's a nice, like I said, digest for you to be able to consume everything, I guess, that's going on in sort of bite-sized fashion. So, it depends on where you look. Tennis has been a little rough lately as far as getting wins. Golf's been, kind of in the middle. They've been doing well. Like I said, it kind of depends on where you look. But right now, basketball is where all the attention is. That's where they are now into the grind of the last couple of weeks of the regular season. You got the Big 12 conference tournaments right around the corner. And in terms of both basketball programs, there's a little bit of a mixed bag there as well. And last week was certainly that. The women struggling mightily, can't buy themselves a win. Now 4 straight losses and hovering right around 500 in conference play, which is highly unusual for them. And for the men, a bit of a mixed bag last week with the win over West Virginia and then the loss to Kansas. So let's start off with the men. We've also got an important date coming out for football that we will discuss as the spring schedule starts to take a bit more shape as well. But for Baylor men's basketball, had a fantastic year up until this point. They've got K-State coming up later on tonight. Jerome Tang, the return trip to Manhattan after Tang and company came into town and got the big surprising win in his first duel with Scott Drew. And we know how emotional that was, Grayson, and that ought to make for a really interesting game tonight because they've been struggling really the last couple of weeks in particular, K-State, in really since that Baylor game, they sort of lost a little bit of momentum along the way, whereas they started out of the gates just red hot, one of the best stories in college basketball, and you're like, shoot, Jerome Tang's like this new superstar head coach, and they've lost a little steam along the way, safe to say. But for Baylor men's basketball, before we get into tonight and what the K-State matchup means and all of that, you look back at last week and getting that win over West Virginia. Obviously, that was important because that's a team that is behind you in the standings. Last thing you wanted to do in this very tight race was go and lose a game that you weren't expecting to lose. And that would have been the case had they lost to the Mountaineers. Instead, Jalen Bridges gets the 2-0 performance earns 2 wins against his old team. So that's one of the fun underlying stories. But 79-67 at the Farrell Center. Turn around, though, and go to Lawrence, Kansas, and feeling great at halftime. You're up by double digits. Everything's going about as well as you can imagine. And then one of the worst second halves that we've ever seen from a competitive Baylor basketball team unfolded there in Lawrence. And KU goes from down double digits to winning by double digits. So 1-1 on the week. Now a game back in the Big 12 standings. Kansas and Texas still on top. As we mentioned, the big game against K-State tonight. And really, you got to win all of them from here on out if you're looking at just the regular season crown, and you'll need a little bit of help as well. So what did you make of the 1-1 showing last week that really, I guess the big story coming out was that second half and Kansas earning that win?
Yeah, so, I don't want to brush over the West Virginia win because that's another top 25 Ken Pom win, which is just fascinating to see that. West Virginia is only 4 games over 500, but they're 24th in Ken Pom. That's a really competitive team, and they came out and beat up on Oklahoma State this week as well. So, big win for Baylor. They won by double digits. That game was never really in doubt. It was like a 6-point game for a long time. Baylor jumped it out to double digits in the second half, came away with a big home win. But the Kansas game is where I want to focus a lot of the attention. So, obviously, I'm sitting there watching the first half, and they looked outstanding. Like, their guards were hitting crazy threes. Keontae George taking really tough shots, making them. Keontae had the big dunk, which so far is the highlight of the year, in my opinion, as far as just individual plays. It was fantastic. Dunked on KJ Adams. And then LJ Cryer and Adam Flagler continuing to do what they've done over the second half of the year, and that is just score points in bunches. And that first half was so impressive. But I think I went into halftime, and I know the announcer said this, and I felt this way as well. It was only a 13-point game. And I think if you sat there and watched that game, it really should have been like 20 or 25. It should have been a complete snowball like what happened in the second half. But KU was able to get to the foul line, which is something that happens a lot now in Fieldhouse, and they were able to make up some points just by getting to the free throw line. I think it was like 15-4 free throw advantage in the first half, which really allowed them to at least stay within striking distance. And I do think in basketball, when you're up by 20 versus up by 13, that is a huge difference. And so I think Baylor somewhat let KU off the hook in the first half. And then the second half, as we saw, one of the worst defensive performances I've ever seen from a Baylor basketball team. Kendall Kaut mentioned on our website, what they did in the second half defensively was equivalent of fouling an 86% foul shooter every time down the floor and having him shoot free throws. That's just insane, and that just speaks to the kind of looks they were giving up, which was transition layups, backdoor cuts for layups, turning the ball over for dunks, wide open threes. And in the first half, KU wasn't hitting their open threes. They had open looks. They weren't making them. They flipped that around the second half, and then defensively, they got up on Baylor. They crowded Baylor's shooters, and they said, hey, if you're going to drive by us or you're going to throw passes to your bigs in the middle of the lane and score layups, that's what we're going to make you do. We're not going to allow you to just stand there and shoot threes the rest of this game or just, win one-on-one matchups because we know you can do that. So KU's adjustments, KU's coaching at the end of the day, their adjustments they made coming out of halftime were the difference in this one. So tough, disappointing loss for Baylor, but now they got to figure out a way to bounce back. And also got to remember, hey, was the expectation to go win in Allen Fieldhouse? Was that what everyone thought was going to happen? No. It's unfortunate how it happened, but at the end of the day, it's just a loss that you kind of knew going into the year was one that you were pretty likely was going to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if you were going out predicting the schedule, you probably had an L next to Allen Fieldhouse. Yeah. If you're just being realistic about it. So, yeah, it's not a complete shocker that they lost. It is very much the way that it happened. And, yeah, just atrocious defense, just a really bad second half. All-time historically bad second half that, anytime you're up, 15-ish and you seem like you're in cruise control, that's you never thought that Kansas was dead at halftime, but, you didn't expect that kind of a run there in the second half to go from down double digits to winning cleanly and clearly by double digits the way that they did. So, yeah, all bad there in Lawrence, Kansas to close out that road trip. And as a result, now with you looking at the Big 12 standings, and just a couple of weeks ago, you got KU at 11-4. They've won 5 straight games now at this point, and just 3 games remaining for them in Big 12 play.
And the big thing for them is they have Tech and West Virginia, who I know are trending in the right direction, but both those games are in Allen Fieldhouse.
Yeah.
They're not going to lose those 2. But then it's intriguing. The last weekend of the year, they do travel to Austin, and they play Texas. So still a lot to be decided, but like you said, not a lot left on their schedule heading into that.
Yeah, so they're at 11-4, just 3 games remaining. Texas at 10-4, so they've got 5 games remaining. Baylor will obviously play them. They'll also play Kansas, as you just mentioned. So they're right there in second place. Baylor then at 9-5. And there's K-State at 8-6. Iowa State's also 8-6, as they've been very up and down. But now tonight in Manhattan, Kansas, it's K-State Part 2. We know the first time around, Jerome Tang was right in the thick of just his exploding onto the scene, and everybody was talking about how suddenly the color lavender was like the coolest uniform color ever, and the crowds were going nuts in Manhattan, and it seemed like they couldn't do any wrong. I mean, they were just winning games, and now it's started to balance out a bit and come back down to earth a little bit, to the point of, just a couple of weeks ago, I'm sitting there, I think they had lost a couple in a row or something, and people are complaining about the crowds again, and it's just like, all right, now we've kind of settled back down to earth a little, but still a very good team with a couple of, in particular, very good players. Your thoughts tonight on the Baylor men and what they're facing and what they have to do taking on Tang and K-State?
Right. So I just kind of want to put their slide in perspective. They're 2-4, right? But over their last 6. And so if you look at their schedule, a lot of people are saying, oh, they're in this crazy slide. Okay, well, they lost at Kansas, who they beat earlier in the year, so you figured they were probably going to lose that game. They lost to Texas, who, again, is right there at the top of the Big 12 standings. They beat TCU by 21 without Mike Miles. Not a great win, whatever. Then they got the unfortunate pleasure of playing Texas Tech and Oklahoma at this point in the season, as both those teams are starting to play better towards the end of the year. And they played both on the road. And they lost both of those games. Then they rebounded and beat an Iowa State team at home over the weekend. So, yes, I know they're 2-4, but it's been a tough schedule. It's been a really tough slate for them, and they still have kind of weathered it. I mean, they're still 20-7. They're still 8-6. Their schedule to end the year is fairly favorable, and a lot of people were picking them to potentially win the conference because of their in-season schedule. But like you said, it's kind of gone downhill a little bit. I don't consider them a Big 12 contender anymore. Now, as far as the Baylor side of things, they got to regroup and adjust. And I do believe after that second half, you're going to see a very focused Baylor team. And I just simply think Baylor is the better basketball team. And for that reason, I think Baylor's probably going to win this game by double digits. I think that Baylor is going to play an inspired brand of basketball tonight. And I think they're going to come away with the win. I think they actually match up pretty well with Kansas State, despite the fact that they lost to them the first time. I would say this is clearly a very different Baylor team. Since that matchup, I would also say this is a very different Kansas State team since that first matchup as well. I'm expecting the better team to win tonight, and I'm expecting Baylor to get a little revenge in this matchup, and what would be a huge one for the Big 12 race and for Baylor in general.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of their seeding overall, I want to keep winning games, obviously, although to get that regular season title, again, they'll have to win out and also get some help, and that's probably not super likely, but all you can do is take care of what you got in front of you, and that's tonight against Kansas State. So get a win there and see what else happens along the way. And, if you don't get the breaks needed, then you still got the Big 12 tournament, and you've got, obviously, the biggest prize, the NCAA tournament upcoming. So much basketball left to play, and they're in a good spot considering how they started. I mean, they've been on quite the tear. Just that second half against Kansas kind of slammed the brakes on all the feel-good over the last few weeks and just kind of woke everybody up to, A, Kansas is still Kansas, and B, you play like that, you're going to get washed by pretty much anybody. So
yeah, and I mean, the calendar is about to turn over to March, and you need to start playing your best basketball. And here's the deal. Even if they lose to Kansas State this weekend, tonight, you got to remember that this weekend they play Texas, and that's another huge game. It's an in-state rivalry. They lost the first game. They're both still in the Big 12 title hunt, so still a lot to play for. Again, I expect them to win tonight. I actually expect them to beat Texas as well this weekend. I don't think that they'll lose to them twice in a season, and so I'm anticipating a bounce-back week for this Baylor basketball program, and they really need one. Because simply put, I know we're harping on this Kansas second half, but to me, the bigger issue is they're second in KenPom on offense. They're 88th in KenPom on defense. That has got to get fixed some way, somehow. I'm not saying that they need to have a top 25 defense the rest of the way, but they need to at least be top 35 if you actually want to win a national championship. The stats bear that out. The facts bear that out. If they actually want to compete in March, that defense has to get fixed, and hopefully we see some signs of that over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and asking Ashley Hodge from our website on the radio show yesterday about, surprises and, kind of the big expectations rolling into the season. I mean, he thought they'd be pretty good on offense, but I think everybody's shocked by the defense and just how lacking they are in that area. That's surprising to, I think, everybody involved, that they're they weren't expecting to be like a top 5 defense, but I mean, they've been pretty low. I mean, as you just mentioned, nearing the bottom 100. So yeah, that's got to get corrected.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with size. It's a lot to do, I know a lot of people are harping on Keontae, Key's defense, and I know he does get lost at times, but he's a freshman. I also think that we've seen some regression defensively from Flo Thamba. I think not having Everyday John there obviously is a big impact, and watching him move, he's not back. You can tell defensively, he's just not quite there, which is to be expected. And Scott Drews mentioned, I think he mentioned it on y'all's show, just talking about how he thinks it'll be a little while before it's all comes together for this team and for Everyday John as well. So they need to make strides in that area. They need to continue playing really good offense, which we've seen up to this point. I know what to expect from Flagler and LJ. Now it's just making sure the rest of the team stays well-rounded and connected. And I honestly think if they start playing really good defense, that will help the offense as well. So they need to, I think, keep that in mind. That creates easier buckets going the other way, creates transition opportunities, and I think just helps this team flow in general.
Yeah, and at the same time, you are who you are, and you're not going to magically, become great defensively with a month to go in the season when you've been playing for 3-4 months already. So, I mean, that's also being realistic about the situation. They can get better. They're also not going to magically turn into a top 20 defense. So, find the nice middle ground. Play as well as you can offensively. They have arguably the best offense in the country, and you play well on that side and do what you can on the other side, and hopefully that takes you as far as it can. But, yeah, I mean, that second half against KU is ugly, so flush that. And tonight, Kansas State on the road in Manhattan, so we have that to look forward to here in the next few hours. And obviously, that result, one way or the other, will be important just in terms of the standings, seedings, things like that moving forward. But it was good to see them get that West Virginia win. Meanwhile, on the women's side of things, do have some football notes we'll get to in just a couple of minutes, but do want to stick with hoops here as Nikki Collin and the women have lost 4 straight games now, really struggling to find themselves a win. The freshman duo of Little Page Bugs and Fauntleroy continues to be great, continues to, seemingly get acknowledged, feels like every week by the Big 12 Conference, but here as of late, it's been, good performances but bad outcomes, and they had a really rough 0-2 week a week ago that we talked about a little bit, but this was like another level of bad, because not only did you lose a couple more games, but you turned around out of last week. And last week, here's just kind of set the table. You had number 16 Oklahoma dead to rights in Waco. I mean, had them on the ropes. All you needed was to land one more blow, and you beat the Sooners. And quite frankly, at that point, you had won 3 straight games, so you were in a really good spot. And instead, what has happened since then, and that was fresh off the heels of beating a nearly top 10 Iowa State team. So you were flying high. And next thing you know, you choke against Oklahoma. I'm sorry, but you do. You let that game slip through your fingertips. You end up losing in overtime by 6. So you dropped that one. You clearly have a hangover heading into the next game, and albeit Oklahoma State was playing better, but you proceed to get beat by 21 at Stillwater. So you let the Oklahoma loss kind of, weigh you down a little bit, and then credit to Oklahoma State for doing the rest of it. All right, that's cool, but you need to stop the bleeding. How about K-State? They're not that good, right? You go to K-State, it's tough playing on the road, that's fine, but still, you're Baylor. You should, feel pretty good about your opportunity to go in there and get a win. You get blown out by nearly 20 points. So this whole, clean the week, freshen it up, and, put the losses behind you or whatever, I mean, they were even more hungover in that game, seemingly. All right, that's cool. Here comes Iowa State. We just beat them. They've dropped 10 spots since we last played them. Surely we can beat them now at home, mind you. Instead, another game where win is right there. Just reach out and grab this win and take it home with you and celebrate it. And they cannot close it out. And Iowa State comes back and wins by 4 as that drops them to 4 straight losses on the year. And, of course, that Iowa State game, another overtime loss where they just can't close it out in regulation. And they suffer in extras. And so just since this Oklahoma game, man, it has been loss after loss after loss after loss. And I wouldn't be making that big of a deal about it, although they are now at 500 in Big 12 play, which is extremely foreign territory for them. I mean, not even close to having been in that position in 2 decades, for real. But you've got your head coach who's very clearly in the post game mentioning the outside noise and just very perturbed or flustered or whatever adjective you want to use. Nikki Collin, standing up for herself and for her team and I can coach, and very adamant about outside noise is not going to affect them, and they know what they're doing and she knows what she's doing, and all that's great and everything. But man, it just seems like food for the trolls as you're losing 4 straight. And I mean, I believe her. I think that she's the same coach who helped lead them to a Big 12 championship last year. I know the first thing Facebook person will say is, well, Alice Kim's player, that kind of thing. I'm not here to debate all of that. I mean, the situations are what they are. But she's catching heat from the Facebook crowd because I don't see a ton of it on Twitter. I mean, I might see somebody here and there. I don't know about Instagram. I don't know if Instagram cares, but clearly the Facebook crowd does. And I know that's as an age thing in so many ways. That's I don't know, a demographics thing in so many ways. Just that crowd has been the crowd that really has followed women's basketball along the way. And, there's obviously still a lot of bad blood. Let's just be real about it from the coaching transition. But again, as I've tried to explain to everybody multiple times, I mean, you can delve back and roll in that mud all you want to, but the fact of the matter is this is year number 2 that she's almost wrapping up now at this point, so we all got to move along at some point. And there's granted some people that are enjoying probably watching her struggle, and there's also some people just frustrated because, hey, this is a very proud program, and what's going on here? We can't just completely lose our grip on women's basketball. This is part of what makes Baylor, quite frankly. So, man, this has been kind of tough to watch here. As you can tell, just based on our press conference, that it's the walls are closing in, it feels like. And so it just makes me wonder, kind of setting the whole table here, of what's ahead of them now. Can they snap this losing streak? I mean, can they get off the schneid, and how strongly can they close this season? And how much do people have the patience to realize that Bella Fauntleroy and Dariana Little-Page-Bugs can be big pieces of what they're doing moving forward? I'm sure we'll talk to Mac Rhodes either today or whenever we do get him next time, and we'll bring this up and just kind of get his feel. But he's been very just patient because, unlike fans, you can't go every win or loss, go high and low as an athletic director. You just got to be Mr. or Mrs. in the middle and keep an even keel. But right now, I mean, it's 4 straight losses, Grayson, and clearly she's addressing outside noise in the post game, so that's rattling and reverberating around the program as well. So, just what do you make of kind of the position that they're in right now and just where they're headed as well?
Yeah, and Nikki Collins actually going to be on 365 Sports radio show later on today.
Oh, yeah, that's right. 5. Yeah, Smokey's going to have that. Yeah, that's right.
So that'll be a big time, I think, to ask some of those important questions. And frankly, losing to Iowa State, losing to Oklahoma, that's fine. Both of those programs are good. Oklahoma's having a great year. They're 22-4. And losing to Oklahoma State, who's on a roll right now, they're 9-5 in conference play, tied for third, is not horrible either. But going on the road and losing to Kansas State by 20 is a problem. Kansas State is now 4-10 in the Big 12. And just to put some context on how bad this loss was, after Baylor lost to Kansas State by 20, Kansas State then showed up in Fort Worth against an 0-13 TCU team in conference play. 0-13, and they lost by double digits to TCU. That's just inexcusable, and that's kind of where K-State is at as a program, and that just tells you how bad that loss was for Baylor. And I know you don't want to make too big of a deal about it, but you kind of have to right now because now they're inching dangerously close to being on the bubble and out of the NCAA tournament, which would be unprecedented for this program. I don't care. The injuries, I've mentioned this, the injuries have piled up. I understand that. But to be on the bubble, even with, there's still talent on this roster. Like, this is still a program that recruits at a high level. There's no reason for them to be on the bubble and losing to a program like Kansas State at this point, in my eyes. And so now you turn around and you go, hey, okay, they've lost 4 in a row. How do you get this back on track? Well, they have great opportunities to get back on track this week. They go to TCU, who, as I mentioned, is now 1-13 in Big 12 play. Absolutely cannot lose that game. You lose that game and you're squarely on the bubble in my eyes. And then they play Texas Tech, who is 4-10 and is on a big losing streak as well, kind of like Baylor is. And that game's at home. Another game you cannot lose. So 2 in a row, they need to go 2-0 this week. Then they play at Texas. Odds are you're probably going to lose that game, but it'd be great to see them bounce back and win that. And then you get West Virginia at the end of the year, who's sitting tied with them in the standings. So 3 great opportunities for wins, 3 games they absolutely should win, and then a matchup against a rival who you can still go beat. So still plenty of time for them to build their resume more and get back on track as March is right around the corner. But, these past couple weeks have been really, really tough to watch, and they're just not in a great place right now.
Yeah, no, they are in desperate need of a win. That would make everything, I think, feel a lot better, even if it was only temporary. As you mentioned, Smoak is actually going to be recording a piece with her, so we'll have that locked and loaded. I don't anticipate that it's going to be like some long 20-minute deep dive. I think it's going to be kind of, just a quick check-in, but a check-in nonetheless is probably needed, and we haven't done that in quite some time. So that'll be a nice change of pace from just simply hearing her in press conferences, which as of late have been tough. And Garrett, you follow them. You write about them for the website, the Baylor women's team. So you've been tracking all year, and we always like to, dive in for a second to get your take. And I think I kind of ran the gamut of summarizing sort of what's been going on lately. But did I miss anything? And sort of where are you right now with where they sit?
I think you kind of nailed it, honestly. When you look at the team, I feel like there have been reasonable concerns from Jaden Owen's offensive production all season long. And I think right now, if you're a team and you're scouting Baylor, you realize that if we can take Sarah Andrews out of the game offensively, then there's no real scoring threat from Baylor. And then if you go back and look at what Caitlin Bickle's been able to do defensively over the past, I would say, month or so, she gets in foul trouble. And there's no help off the bench. The bench is so short because of everything with, Asia getting hurt and Dre not being able to play, and then with whatever was going on with Kendra Gillespie from a personal standpoint. So there's no help there. So if you can attack the basket and you can get Caitlin in foul trouble and you can keep Sarah from scoring, you can beat Baylor. And I think the fact that you're having to rely on freshmen to really carry the load night in and night out is concerning at this point. But if you flip the script, maybe you can build off that and use that positive momentum going into next year. But right now, man, this is what I've been concerned about all year. They rely too much on shooting the deep ball. If you look, they rely. So Sarah, Jamie Asbury, and Jaden combined for 1 of 15 from downtown. At some point, you've got to stop shooting and drive to the rim, man. Right. And they just haven't been able to do that. I think they're in their own head at this point. When you look at the remaining schedule, I see your best case scenario is 2-2. And you have to at least go 2-2.
So 2-2 with a schedule of Texas Tech and West Virginia at home and then a road game.
I don't think you beat Texas, and I don't think you beat West Virginia. And the reason I'm saying that with West Virginia is because their head coach I feel like is in Nikki Collins' head. She was the head coach of South Dakota State who beat them last year in the tournament. They handled business when they were in Morgantown. Now you're coming into Waco, and if you're, I just, maybe that's just me kind of, being not selfish,
no, I
but
mean, they're both
apprehensive.
7-7.
Yeah. That's just kind of where I'm at right now. Looking at this, you beat Tech by 20 the first time around. TCU is what it is. Texas, I don't see you beating Texas. But that wild card game with West Virginia, if they can get over that hump, I think your best case scenario is 2-2.
Yeah, no, I mean that's very fair. That's why we asked, and that's with the old, I guess, ways of doing things where you're very post-driven. The last thing you wanted to see was like a red-hot shooting three-point team, and that was kind of their Achilles heel. We can all go back to the Louisville game back when Brittany Griner was still playing, and that was like the way that you could get to them was just a hot shooting team. There wasn't much they could do about it, right? And then with Nikki Collins, the idea is they're not so much post-driven. It's like you rely a lot on shooting, and if you can't shoot well on a given night, then you're just kind of screwed, man. And instead of having an option to pivot to that you feel strongly about, it's like, well, just keep firing and hope they start dropping.
Their options are young. The options that they're trying to feed the ball to. That's
for various reasons, and like to her credit, like she's not dealing with the full deck, but also that's not going to stand as like a reason why you're not where you're supposed to be. And you can't do that year after year, and you can't really even do that like 10 games in a row or, whatever you want to, point to stretch-wise. And she's not been like, out there making an excuse or anything, but it's frustrating when you start to look, okay, what's going on? And yeah, there's not a lot of options out there for you when it's, dadgum near March. I mean, this is go time now. Like, you don't have a transfer portal right now. You're going to have that in the offseason. You had all your time to get this together, and you caught some bad breaks, but, I mean, it is what it is. So, got to rally the troops and just keep chipping away and firing away. And, I think 2-2 would be your baseline. 3-1 would be ideal. 4-0 would be a dream because that means you beat Texas, and that doesn't seem all that likely at this point. But anything less than 2-2, and that would be really, really bad news. And right now, you mentioned them being on the bubble. I see them in the latest ESPN as an 8 seed. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of where they're sitting right now. It is hard to imagine a tournament without them in it. But, I mean, that's kind of the fire that they were, playing with. And so I understand frustrations, and she's probably as frustrated as much as anybody. Again, we'll hear from her on 365 Sports, her being head coach Nikki Collins later on this afternoon. But, yeah, just super unfamiliar territory. So the standings right now, Oklahoma and Texas both at 12-3. OU on fire. They've won 6 straight games. Then you got Oklahoma State and Iowa State are both at 9-5. They each have been on a little bit of a streak. Oklahoma State having won 5 straight now. So the state of Oklahoma playing some good women's basketball. But yeah, OU, Texas, Oak State, Iowa State, and then the pair at 7-7, West Virginia and Baylor. For what it's worth, KU 6-8, Tech and K-State 4-10 apiece, and then TCU at 1-13. So, yeah, need to get at least a couple of wins in these next 2. At least a couple of wins in these next 4. But getting 3 or 4 wins would be far, far more ideal, although very tough to pull off.
Yeah, and really quickly, they're an 8 seed, but just to be clear, let's say they do go, the direction that Garrett just said. Wins against TCU and Texas Tech aren't going to help you at all. Those aren't impressive wins. And then if you lose to the 2 teams that are actually, relevant on your schedule, if they go 2-2 and then they're bounced in the first round of the Big 12 tournament, which they're trending in that direction right now, I think they're probably looking at like a 10, maybe an 11 seed. I mean, if you're an 8 right now and you don't get any big wins on your resume, you just add 2 wins over kind of, what I would call cupcakes, like that's not going to really move the needle. Now, if you go 1-3 during this stretch and then bounce in the Big 12 tournament, you're probably one of the last teams in the field. So that's kind of where I view them at right now.
All right, elsewhere, just kind of doing a sweep throughout the rest of spring. Not going to touch on everything, but let's just hit the diamond real briefly. Mitch Thompson in baseball, they open up, get a walk-off win on Friday night, his debut as head coach, and nice to see them have a dramatic walk-off win to kind of get the era started. And, that was kind of like Hollywood movie, not quite to the level of Hollywood probably, because it was just the first game of the season. But that was a very kind of almost like somebody wrote a script for Mitch Thompson's first game as the Bears won 6-5 in extra innings. But not a great follow-up, dropping the next two. Game 2 in particular, I mean, they lose 20-5, but they give up, 15 runs in one inning. To lose by 15 runs. So an ugly Game 2 against Central Michigan, maybe a little bit of a hangover of celebrating the night before, the big first win, but then drop a close one in game number 3 to drop their first series. Central Michigan, a respectable opponent, but the way you started off, you would like to have gotten one of those next two, and that Game 2, like I said, was really ugly. But baseball, getting off the sidelines and getting to it, and you're shaking your head. Not excited about the first series?
No, this was really tough to watch, honestly, because in all seriousness, those two games that they lost, Game 2 and Game 3, just came down to 2 innings.
Yeah.
To be honest. So like you mentioned, the 15-run inning in Game 2, that game was over after that 15-run inning. And then in Game 3, it was the second inning. They gave up 4 runs in that inning, and those were all 4 runs that Central Michigan scored for the game. They lost that game 4-3. I mean, it was a close one, especially in the 6th. And it was frustrating because it felt like Baylor, I'm not going to say they should have won this series, but they had a great chance to win this series against a program that's won at least 42 games each of the last 2 years. So they were right there. Unfortunately, I think that might happen a lot this year. This is a young, inexperienced team with a lot of transfers, a pitching staff that I don't fully trust right now. At this point, we'll see if they improve and get better throughout. But, I have concerns coming out of this, but it's not really concerns that I didn't think were going to be concerns coming in. This team was picked to finish last in the conference for a reason. The expectation is just that they should compete, play hard, be in a lot of games, be in series, hopefully win a couple series that they shouldn't. And, hopefully when you turn around at the end of the year, they've won like 30 games and maybe have won double-digit Big 12 games. That would be a crazy successful year for this team in the first year with Mitch Thompson. So I come away encouraged, but also just sitting there going, man, they had a great chance to start 2-1 and win their opening series.
Yeah, when you don't necessarily think that there's going to be a ton of series wins on the horizon, the ones that you do have an opportunity to win, you better, grab those while you can. And so, yeah, a golden opportunity at home, especially taking Game 1. But, yeah, just a bad inning in Game 2. I mean, 15 runs in one inning and with 2 outs.
Yeah. It was like all with 2 outs. Yeah.
I mean, that's insane how that happens. But, that bit them. And then, a close one on Sunday. So they go 1-2. But, yeah, I mean, it's one of those years where there's not sky-high expectations, although I do think people feel like Mitch Thompson will get it righted before, too long. But I'm excited to see how they grow. Not a big overreaction to the opening series. Again, as you mentioned, they were picked last in the conference. I don't think people want to set that as the standard and just expect them to lose all the time. But, it'll be interesting to see kind of how they jump back into it and how they fare moving forward. But good to see them get off to the fun start, just in terms of all the people that were there on Friday night and kind of this new era getting started, and to have the big win was at least a nice feel-good moment. And I think there will be some more of those along the way. But they'll play Houston Christian tonight at Baylor Ballpark, and that's Tuesday for anybody listening after the fact. And then Duke on the road for a weekend series. So that's all getting underway. Meanwhile, on the women's side of things, diamond-wise, a perfect game pitched last weekend, and hosting the Getterman Classic. They go 4-0, and that includes not only a perfect, or what was it, a perfect game or was it a no-hitter?
Perfect game.
It was perfect game. Yeah, it was a 7-inning perfect game, first in school history. Yeah. But also in that same weekend of going 4-0, a huge win over number 1 Oklahoma, who does not lose much ever in the game of softball. I mean, they have been the premier program now for a while up there in Norman, Oklahoma. But a huge win for Glenn Moore and this Baylor softball team, and just a big weekend for them overall. So he's probably if you're around on campus, heard a lot of cheers coming from over at Getterman Stadium. But, yeah, they finished the Classic 4-0, also beat SFA and Longwood, shut them out by a combined score of 10-0, shut out Army in the finale 7-0. So they go 14-17-0, or 17-0. They outscore 3 of their opponents, and then the 4-3 win over number 1 OU in that third of 4 games. Now they stick around at home. They'll be back at Getterman this weekend and hosting the Baylor Invitational that'll feature Minnesota and Maryland and also A&M Commerce. So they'll have a bunch of games coming up starting later on this week. But, man, what a start for Glenn Moore and Dariana Orme with the perfect game, and also had some more impact on the mound and just team-wide throughout the rest of the weekend as well. But, man, what a great start for that program.
Yeah, Dariana Orme, she was fantastic this week. She pitched against Oklahoma as well, got the win in that one. Gave up 6 hits, but didn't give up a single earned run. She was fantastic. Like you said, she had the perfect game as well. Baylor's had a perfect game in the past, but it was in a 5-inning game. So like you said, first 7-inning perfect game in Baylor history. Fantastic to see that. They had a great week, and this is a bounce back for them because they lost to Arkansas in what was a very close game. This is a top 5 Arkansas team that they lost to, and they bounced back in a huge way this week. I know it didn't get publicized a lot, but just to put in perspective, I think I'm trying to make sure I get the stat right, but I believe Oklahoma has lost 7 times in the last 2 years.
Something like that, yeah.
It's something crazy. Like, this wasn't just a big win. This was a historic win for the program and for, just Baylor this year. But I think it was something like they're 128-8.
Oh, yeah, they've been
their last,
exceptional. It's the first win for Baylor over them in 5 years.
So, yeah, they're 123-8 since 2021. 123-8. This is an epic win, and it wasn't like they were facing their backup pitchers either. They faced their ace, I believe, in that game. So they definitely, they got pushed, and Baylor pushed right back, came away with a massive win, and very happy for them. And now they're finally ranked, which also they're ranked 25th in the nation. Come on, guys. Do better. They just beat the number 1 team in the nation, and they only moved up to 25, and their only loss is to a top 5 Arkansas team. Come on now. But anyways, if they have another really good week, and I could see them bouncing up even more, but great to see this for Glenn Moore in that program. It's truly a historic win.
Yeah, big time win, big weekend. So, again, they'll be back at home for more starting on Friday and at least 4 games. And then they will go to, the tournament part of, the 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, depending on how the first few games shake out. But, yeah, some good teams coming to town, so that should make for an entertaining weekend as you start to have that sort of spring feel around campus, which is always pretty nice and super active and fun. So, big week, and there's plenty more. Again, check out the Good, the Bad, the Ugly column for a digest of what all's going on. That's over on the Sikkim 365 premium side of things. If you're not a member already, there's just one of a million reasons why to go and throw your support our way and follow along with all things Baylor Athletics in front of the camera and behind the scenes as well. But, yeah, there's a little bit of a roundup of kind of all things going on right now, or a lot of the things going on right now. Let's touch briefly on a couple of football notes. There's not a lot to get to. The spring game was announced as far as, we just know dates now, and we didn't know that previously, so that's good to have out there. We're going to be waiting until late April 22nd, a Saturday, green and gold game. That'll be green and gold weekend, but that gives us about 2 months exactly to ramp up to the green and gold game that will bring spring to a close. But that also means we've got about 1 month exactly till practices start. So we got a month from today. March 21st, they'll get underway, 15 practices. Don't know anything about the schedule or access to that just yet, but if it's been like past years, then we'll have an opportunity to kind of walk around at practices a few times and also get some audio and those things. But, March 21st to kick off practices, and then April 22nd to close out practices with that, green and gold scrimmage. But 15 to go, and we'll cover all 15 of those. There's not breaking news, but we'll keep you up to date as best we can on all things going on during that time period. So good to have a date in mind as far as that goes and start to plan accordingly. Also saw where they hired a new assistant on staff from the Killeen area, Craig Watts Jr., assistant O-line coach, played his ball at Killeen High. We used to play in the NFL for a bit as well, and so he's going to be heading back, as he said in his message, to the 254 and helping out Erica Mateos and Jeff Grimes. But, yeah, Craig Watts, now Baylor assistant O-line coach, so just a small staff note there as well. But, Grayson, anything –
yeah, he's coming in for Patrick McCarry, I think. I'm not sure where he's heading, but he was I don't know if it's GA, if that's kind of how they get around this. But, yeah, so I think that's what he's
basically
replacing.
the gist of it. He's not a full-time assistant,
right.
one of the 10 main, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so he'll come in. That was, I think, a nice pickup and an intriguing little news story. And then, of course, like you mentioned, the spring game. So excited for that, excited to get spring football started. It should be fun. I think the biggest thing is seeing who's on the roster, who's not on the roster, because we get more clarification on that with the spring roster. And then, of course, position changes, because we're going to see it. We saw it last year. There were a lot of storylines. Christian Morgan was playing the star position at this time during the spring. And so we're going to get to talk a lot about that as well. And also get our first look at, the newcomers. Lots of transfers on this team, lots of new faces. So a lot to talk about for sure. And that always is a lot of fun, and I'm sure it will be again this year.
Yep, so we've got that to look forward to here over the next few weeks, and we'll ramp up. But basketball very much the headliners right now, and that'll be the case from here on out. But we'll have that hopefully good amount of crossover as far as like them playing in the tournament, and then football's ongoing, and then baseball and softball are doing whatever they're doing, and then all the rest of the sports as well. But hope to have some major activity going on here in a month's time, and plenty to still be talking about. But that was kind of it football-wise. I mean, there wasn't, you think about all the different freaking stories there have been this offseason. This is like the first time it's kind of just settled down somewhat, because there's been signing days or coaching changes or transfer portal stuff, or, I mean, you name it. They've pretty much been at it since the season wrapped. So, yeah, kind of a little lull. Although, I mean, I guess – there was, football-wise, some alums that were playing in the XFL this past weekend. I had an article on that, so you maybe saw Abram Smith or Josh Gordon or those guys on TV. Seemed like it was a nice opening weekend for that league and for those guys. But, yeah, I mean, that'll kind of have to tide you over outside of recruiting stuff. But good to see that date out there. So I want to get into some mailbag questions here.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we'll touch on a few more things here to close it out, as we normally do with the mailbag here on the Bearcast. And let's start off with Scotty B, the Baylor King, buy or sell. The Big 12 will have the Big 12 will have 2 1 seeds for the NCAA tournament for men's basketball.
Yeah, I'm going to sell it. I think that they're going to have 1, and I think it's going to be Kansas. And then I think Baylor and Texas will probably be on the 2 line. That's just kind of where things are trending right now. It just my issue is how are these teams going to pass Houston, Alabama, Purdue, and Kansas? I just think it's going to be hard for those 4 to get moved out unless they go on a really long losing streak. And there's also some other teams that I think are still ahead of them. So, yeah, I'd say sell.
Let's see here. The committee, didn't they release their rankings here recently? They had those updated rankings. I think it's loading up now. So they had, what was that? Alabama at 1, Houston at 2, Purdue at 3, Kansas at 4. Mm-hmm. So that's, Kansas is the safe bet for sure, and that's the one I would go with. And, I don't think they're going to get 2 number 1 seeds.
It's just going to be hard to, Bama doesn't really play anyone in the SEC. Houston plays no one in the American. And Purdue, Big Ten soft as well. It's going to be hard to pass those teams, I think, even if they go on a huge winning streak.
Thank you, Scotty, for the question. Master Pierce, MPH, what a win by Baylor softball. Drove up from Houston to watch the game. It was 100% worth it. Do you guys know how Glenmore recruits and the types of players he goes after? The team chemistry is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know his recruiting strategy, but what I do know is
some of it's been transfer portal. A lot of it's been transfer portal.
I was going to mention that. We know that he targets the transfer portal, and we know this year specifically he's hit on these transfer additions, which hasn't always been the case over the past few years, which is why we've kind of seen some ups and downs, honestly, from the softball program that had been so consistent for quite a few years. So great to see them kind of, it seems at least, getting it back on track.
Yeah, and look no further than Miss Perfect Game from the transfer portal. Dariana coming over from Fresno State. So that was one of the players that they went and got in the portal. And I do know last year, remember when they were it was just kind of like middle of the road, sort of struggling here and there, not like a whole lot to get excited about. But I remember there was a lot of talk about, like, wait till next year. And there was just a confidence about that. And, hitting the transfer portal and the way the team had been shaped up, that there was a feeling that, like, hey, they're going to be pretty good this upcoming year. And so far, I mean, you see how it started off. But, besides Orme, and I hope I'm saying her name right. If I'm not, then I'll get that right because I'm a stickler about that. But Govan as well, who had the big home run, also a transfer.
Yeah.
So, like, that just goes to show you right there, like, two of their biggest players this past weekend, both from the transfer portal. She had come over from SFA. So with the big home run, you already had a pretty significant impact coming out of two of your portal additions. So that's part of it. But outside of that, I don't really know. I mean, that's a question. I think, like, if Faith has an interview with Glenn Moore or we happen to get him on the show, I'll try and keep in mind to, bring that up with Glenn Moore. But definitely succeeding in the transfer portal is part of their strategy. Master Pearson, glad to hear that you had a good time. It seemed like if there was ever a weekend to drive up and check out, Getterman Stadium for some softball, last weekend was a heck of a weekend to do so. So glad to hear that you had a good time. DWH 1845, which quarterback room would you prefer, the one that included Austin Novosad or the one that we have now? Well, obviously they would look different because the moves they made to fill out the rest of this room were all based on his decommitment on signing day. So what are you looking at there? Blake Shapen and Austin Novosad, and I don't know who the third quarterback is in that situation. Or
maybe it's still RJ.
Maybe it's RJ Martinez.
But we don't know that for sure.
But we don't know that. So instead, let's go, it's Blake Shapen and Austin Novosad, or it's Blake Shapen and it is Sawyer Robertson and it's RJ Martinez.
Yeah, it's the second one because it's better for next season. You can make the argument that having Austin for 4 years and maybe once he turns, gets bigger and puts on the weight for his frame and, really turns the corner in his development, then maybe he'd be the best quarterback prospect of the bunch. Very possible. But I think for this next year and probably the year after, I like the veteran leadership that they have in the room now. I like that, Sawyer Robertson has been coached by Mike Leach for multiple years and now comes over to Baylor with a lot of experience in that regard. You still have Shapen in both scenarios. And then you get RJ Martinez, who was very productive at the FCS level. So to get him to walk on is massive as well. I think I'm going to go with the one that they ended up with, even though I couldn't have imagined saying that when Austin did decommit.
Here's the thing is, Novosad was the big high-profile recruit here of late, but, yeah, Sawyer Robertson was in a similar position. Not necessarily like let's compare their Elite 11 numbers and all of that across the board, but a 4-star rated guy that was coveted by Mike Leach and was going to be playing some games for the Bulldogs here in the future. He thought he was good enough to go play and, air it out in the SEC, then that's good enough for me. I'll default to the Pirates, so I don't think that there's really a major difference. Now, like 5-10 years from now, is Austin Novosad starting in the NFL and Sawyer Robertson not? Okay, then we can have a much clearer comparison, but I think on paper, a guy who just signed versus a guy who signed a year before, there's not a lot to differentiate. So you kind of can just
2 years.
2 years, 2 years. So he's actually been in college even longer. So
he's older,
an older guy. So however you want to split that up. So, yeah, give me the extra quarterback in the room. And they would have addressed that too. And maybe it would have been RJ Martinez, like you said. But this is what they have. And I don't think it's all that different from if Novosad would have signed.
Well, I think Sawyer basically did the same thing Austin did, except for the part where Sawyer completely shut down his recruitment after he committed to Mississippi State. He would have had a lot more offers, gotten a lot more high profile in my eyes, had he taken visits and gone to different camps like Austin ended up doing. So, rankings are always dictated by offers. And so I do find them to be fairly similar prospects as they were in high school, like you mentioned.
So on paper, splitting hairs probably, but we'll get to see here in the next couple of years what that answer really is.
But for this year, I don't think there's any doubt that it's Sawyer Robertson, just because he's older, he's more veteran, he's more proven. Like,
yeah, it may not be like a huge advantage, but it is. You'd rather have more experience than not have experience. So yeah, I think you slightly go with the Sawyer Robertson, addition versus the Austin Novosad decision. Signing decision, but I don't think there's a huge difference outside of that so far. Papa Bear, what was Flo Thomba's best year at Baylor?
To me, his best year was the end of last year. Once Everyday John got hurt, I felt like he really turned a corner. He was playing really good basketball. Obviously, he didn't play very well in the North Carolina game in the round of 32, but prior to that, he played good basketball and really had, I felt like his best stretch of his career. So I would go with last year, I guess. At the national championship year, he had moments as well, but I felt like he was at his best last season, which also makes kind of his regression, this year even more puzzling.
Bearcats, what is your confidence level 1 to 10? The Baylor men's basketball team at least makes the Sweet 16.
Yeah, so I have it at an 8 right now. But I'm concerned about it. The defense is just so bad. I mean, it's 88th in the nation. It's very concerning because when you get to the tournament, if you face a team that gets hot and you're not playing good defense, you're going to lose and you're going to get upset. It's happened to Baylor in the past. They lost to North Carolina last year. And I know North Carolina got hot, but you still lost to a team that you were favored to beat. They lost to Yale in 2015, lost to Georgia State in 2014. There's been upsets in there. And so I am concerned. But again, an 8 is still pretty high. A big part of this is going to come down to their seeding and what the matchup looks like. But they really do need to turn that defense around. So I'm still at an 8, but I will tell you, if they lose a few more times before the tournament, I'm going to have some real pause.
Yeah, I'm like a 7 as far as that goes. More confident than I'm not, but I'm not super confident because I've seen in years past how difficult it is just to get to that second weekend. I mean, that first game's one thing, that second game's an entirely different matter, and so it's tough, man. Even if you're somebody who's been flirting with the top 10 basically all year long or flirting with the top 25 all year long like they have, it's really difficult, and there's a reason why, it's such a monumental, Sweet 16 is such a big deal because it's hard to get to no matter how good you are consistently. So, I'm at a 7, but I'm not all in and banking on anything just yet. Thank you for the question, Bearcats. BU Fiji 77, what's your prediction of Big 12 teams making it to the Sweet 16, speaking of?
Yeah, so Andrea Cameron actually mentioned in our YouTube chat that Houston's technically a Big 12 team, so that would give the Big 12 2 number one
Not quite
seeds.
yet, but yes, that asterisk, yes.
Yes, definitely an asterisk there, so thanks for that comment.
Thank you very much for listening.
As far as my prediction for Big 12 teams making it to the Sweet 16, so right now I think Kansas, Baylor, and Texas will all make the Sweet 16. That's where I'm kind of at right now. I think they'll get a good enough seeding that their second round matchup will be favorable. And then I'm still on this Kansas State TCU train that I still think they can make a little bit of noise in March and get to the Sweet 16. So right now, I see 5 teams that could make it. I don't think Iowa State will make that run. I don't see, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Tech, if they make it, really making a whole lot of noise.
Yeah, I think that's fair. As dominant as the conference is, I mean, there is something to be said for, again, just how difficult it is to get to that stage. So I think that's fair. But there's, some great candidates. The Big 12 could really go crazy. So much will depend on seeding and how spread out teams are. How bunched up or spread out are they? That'll make a massive difference, I would think. So, yeah, a lot of missing information, but there's some great candidates to have, 2 or 3 bare minimum, and then maybe even go crazier than that. But it all depends on kind of how the chips fall the next couple of weeks.
Right. I mean, if TCU gets like an 8 seed, then obviously won't be picking them to make the Sweet 16. But if they're able to win some games, get to like the, 5 line, maybe they could make some noise there, make a Sweet 16. Same with K-State. They should be right around that 3 or 4 seed line, I think, when the tournament comes around.
Yeah, and we will see the Wildcats later tonight again. Baylor and K-State, round 2 coming up in Manhattan. But one more question before we head on out of here. Ed Nashville, thank you for answering my question a couple weeks ago about which quarterback you would prefer, Sawyer Robertson or Austin Novosad. You're welcome. Ed, thanks for the question. After the spring competition with Robertson versus Chapin, and if Coach Aranda names a starting quarterback, what are the chances that the loser transfers out and then we would be back in the same position as before with no strong backup? Well, Ed, that's the reason why I don't believe they're going to name a starting quarterback coming out of spring football. That's how I think you avoid that entirely, is you take that competition into fall camp and let them sort it out there and then go from there. And I would think that's probably something they've established in bringing in new guys, is to, let Chapin know, like, hey, man, you're not guaranteed anything. You're going to have to compete, but I don't know that you can say, like, hey, we're going to not name anybody just yet. I think you got to let them be open-minded to think that, like, hey, you can go win the job here in the next couple of months. But, I mean, from a roster management standpoint, you gotta be aware of that situation presenting itself. And so I'm sure they're mindful of that and planning accordingly.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I don't see how you name a starting quarterback out of the spring for that very reason. You got to make sure that all these guys are still at Baylor. I would say, though, I do think that if you name Blake Chapin your starter, I don't see Sawyer Robertson leaving after just transferring in.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that would be the safer way of playing it. I also think if one does leave, you still have R.J. Martinez, who I still think is a fairly capable quarterback and could come in and play for this team. Like, he's better than what they had. You can argue he's better than what they had last year as their third-string quarterback. I think upside-wise, he might be better than Luke Anthony.
We never
got
know.
to see Luke Anthony, so we don't know for sure. But, I think they're going to wait till the fall. I think that's the smart decision to go with, and that way you have all three of those quarterbacks, when you come around to fall football, and you have depth in the room, which is so important.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the game nowadays, and always has been, is, handling your roster and your quarterback room. But now more than ever, it's a fragile situation if you don't do it right. And you can look up overnight and all of a sudden go from having a full room to having one guy. And Baylor's experienced kind of the gamut of that. And now, a really big get in Sawyer Robertson and R.J. Martinez as well, but they're going to have to be smart with how they handle that, and, letting guys know what the deal is and what to expect, and keeping everybody abreast of just how the program operates. But I would imagine that we're going to be talking about Robertson and Chapin in that quarterback room for the next several months and probably in the next season, and who knows when a starter's announced, but I'm not banking on it being in spring. I know that was a big talking point last year because we were all like, either Chapin or Bohannon. Somebody's staying, somebody's going. I don't think that they're going to run into that same situation this time around. I think everybody kind of knows the deal, and everybody's locked in for this upcoming year. So I do think that that's a good thing. But let's see how it shakes out, If somebody just goes there and blows the competition out of the water, who knows? But I'm not expecting that. I think we'll, again, be talking about this for a while. But thank you for the question, and thanks to everybody who asked questions this week in the mailbag. Scotty, Master Pierce, DW, Bearcats, Pawpaw, BU Fiji, and Ed. Thank you to all of you for your questions and for listening as well. Thanks to Andrea as well for listening and chiming in on the chat room, and everybody else a part of the program. Thanks to Garrett Ross behind the scenes as well. Garrett will be with us again this afternoon from 3 until 6 with Smokey and Paul. But Grayson, anything before we head out here?
No, just be sure to listen to 365 Sports 3 to 6 Monday through Friday, and then of course Sikkim 365 Premium for all the content, all the up-to-date information, especially as fall or spring camp is right around the corner. You don't want to miss out. We have all kinds of content and coverage of spring camp and spring football in general.
Yeah, T-minus 1 month till that gets fully underway. In the meantime, seeing videos of Josh Cameron slinging some weight around, and some others as well. That's been fun to see, some glimpses behind the scenes. But for Grayson Grundhoefer, Garrett Ross, for you out there, thank you very much one last time, and we'll talk to you next week. This has been the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com, 365 Sports.